Ryan's office revenge.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I asked, blinking like I didn't just hear my entire career get doused in gasoline and lit with a smug little matchstick smile. Ryan didn't even look up from his tablet. Your performance metrics are inconsistent with our new strategic direction, he said, dragging out each word like it had dirt under its nails. The board needs agile leadership, not legacy thinking. Either way, bonus eligibility requires alignment with our digital transformation roadmap. There it was. The sentence that made my ears ring and my throat close up like a bad allergic reaction. Howard Pierce, 49 years old, 25 years building systems from the ground up, and this Stanford MBA just erased me with a phrase he probably read in a Harvard Business Review article on the plane. 12% system performance improvement, 0 downtime for 18 months, $2.3 million in annual cost savings through my custom integrations. I'd turned a patchwork of legacy mainframes and modern web services into something that actually worked for pharmaceutical manufacturing. FDA compliance maintained, SOX audits passed without a single finding. And this energy drink-stained kid just dismissed it all because I didn't use enough buzzwords in my quarterly report. Across the conference table, a few other executives looked down at their phones, their coffee cups, anywhere but at me. Someone mumbled something about organizational realignment. I wasn't really listening. I was too busy watching my dignity pack its bags and head for the exit. I stood up slowly, took off my security badge, clean and deliberate, and set it down on the table like a poker chip. No raised voice, no snarky comeback, just a quiet end to a very loud betrayal. Let me rewind a bit. The system I'd built wasn't some weekend project. This was 12 years of my life, starting back when Ryan was probably learning how to use Excel in college. When I got to Precision Pharmaceuticals in 2013, their IT infrastructure was held together with duct tape and prayers, ancient IBM AS/400 mainframes talking to newer Oracle databases through middleware that nobody understood anymore. The previous IT director had left suddenly, taking all the documentation with him. What remained was chaos dressed up in expensive enterprise software licenses and a manufacturing environment that couldn't afford a single mistake. See, when you're making drugs, everything has to be perfect. Every batch tracked from raw materials to finished pills. Every temperature reading logged, every mixing time documented. The FDA doesn't mess around with pharmaceutical manufacturing. One data integrity issue, and they can shut down your entire operation. So I rebuilt it. Quietly, methodically, the kind of obsessive work that made my ex-wife suggest I needed better work-life balance during our divorce proceedings. While other departments played politics and ordered catered lunches, I was buried in stored procedures at 2 a.m., mapping data flows that hadn't been documented since the Bush administration. The database architecture I created had 340 tables handling everything from raw material tracking to finished goods inventory. Custom stored procedures that validated every single data entry against FDA 21 CFR Part 11 requirements. Integration points between the manufacturing execution system, the enterprise resource planning software, and the laboratory information management system. I wasn't looking for glory. I just didn't want to live in daily fear of another system crash that would shut down our 3 manufacturing lines and cost us $75,000 an hour in lost production. More importantly, I didn't want to be the guy who caused a drug recall because some data validation failed. But Ryan Walsh didn't see any of that when he showed up 6 months ago as our new VP of Technology. Ryan saw spreadsheets, PowerPoint slides, and his own reflection in Zoom calls. Fresh from some consulting firm where disruption meant replacing everything that actually worked with cloud-based solutions that looked good in quarterly reviews. Ryan was 35, drove a Tesla, and used words like synergy unironically. He'd been hired by our CEO after some consulting engagement where he'd convinced management that our IT costs were 40% higher than industry benchmarks. What he didn't mention was that pharmaceutical companies have compliance requirements that other industries don't face. First thing he did was hire a team of offshore developers from Mumbai. Bright kids? Sure. But they'd never seen our industry. Never worked with FDA regulatory requirements or understood why certain data validation rules existed. Never spent a weekend troubleshooting a production issue because one misconfigured batch recipe could contaminate $200,000 worth of active pharmaceutical ingredients. His plan was simple: migrate everything to the cloud, implement microservices architecture, and reduce our IT operating costs by 35%. On paper, it looked brilliant. In reality, he was proposing to rebuild a system that processed $120 million in annual pharmaceutical production without understanding what made it work. When I showed him my system architecture documentation, complete with integration maps and performance benchmarks, he squinted like he was reading hieroglyphs. "Seems overly complex," he muttered. "Did you consider microservices architecture? What about containerization? We could probably rebuild this entire stack in 6 months using modern frameworks." "What about understanding the business first?" I wanted to ask. But Ryan had already made up his mind about the old guy who'd built everything the wrong way. The breaking point came during our quarterly review meeting. Ryan had prepared a presentation for the executive team about his digital transformation roadmap. Slide after slide of buzzwords: cloud-native, AI-driven analytics, DevOps automation, agile methodologies. Then he got to the personnel slide. "Our current IT leadership represents legacy thinking," he said, clicking to a slide that somehow made 25 years of experience sound like a character flaw. "We need team members who can adapt to rapid change and embrace innovative solutions." I raised my hand. "Ryan," I said as politely as I could manage, "have you actually looked at our compliance requirements? We're not just moving data around. Every change we make has to be validated, documented, and approved by the FDA. You can't just containerize a pharmaceutical manufacturing system without understanding the regulatory implications." He gave me that condescending smile that young managers practice in the mirror. "Howard, I appreciate your concerns, but that's exactly the kind of legacy thinking that's holding us back. Modern cloud platforms have built-in compliance features. We don't need to reinvent the wheel with custom solutions." The room went quiet. I could see a few of the other executives exchanging glances. They knew enough about our industry to understand that Ryan had just suggested replacing a system that had passed every FDA inspection for 12 years with something he'd read about in a white paper. That's when he delivered the final blow. "Your resistance to change is exactly why we need fresh perspective in IT leadership. I'm recommending that Howard transition to a senior developer role while we bring in consulting resources to lead the modernization effort." A demotion. After 12 years of keeping their manufacturing lines running, after building a system that had never failed a compliance audit, he was demoting me to make room for consultants who'd never seen the inside of a pharmaceutical plant. The bonus denial was just the cherry on top of that particular insult. So yeah, I handed over that badge. No tantrum, no dramatic exit speech, just quiet clarity. Because what Ryan didn't realize, what none of them had bothered to ask, was that my system wasn't just code running on servers. It was institutional knowledge, business logic accumulated over decades, tribal wisdom embedded in custom functions and stored procedures. And most importantly, the truly critical stuff lived in my head. Not in Confluence, not in GitHub, not in any pretty documentation portal that Ryan could show off during board meetings. When I walked out that door, I didn't just leave behind a job. I took the roadmap with me. By the time I got home that evening, the story had already started spreading through the company's Slack channels. Howard walked out. No notice, no handoff documentation, just gone. The reactions came in like digital aftershocks. Danny Rodriguez from the back-end team texted me first. "Heard what happened. This is insane, man. Did you really not leave any transition docs?" Then Sharon from QA, "Ryan's telling everyone you couldn't adapt to modern methodologies." I told him where he could stick his methodologies, but the message that hit me was from Linda in operations. "You built that whole system from scratch. They're going to regret this. Mark my words." I stared at her text for a long time, not because it made me feel better, but because it reminded me why this hurt so much. I hadn't just maintained a system. I was the system. Every integration point, every exception handler, every custom validation rule that kept our manufacturing processes running smoothly and kept us compliant with FDA regulations. That night, I did what any rational person would do after getting professionally humiliated. I started backing up my personal files. Tax documents, family photos, my personal script library. Nothing that belonged to the company, just the digital artifacts of a life they'd decided had no value. I also quietly revoked my personal admin access to several development tools. Standard security practice when leaving any company. But I noticed something interesting while cleaning up my accounts. There was an old monitoring script I'd written years ago. back when the offshore integration first started. Nothing fancy, just a watchdog that validated data consistency between our legacy mainframes and the newer cloud components. We called it Guardian because it barked whenever something looked wrong. Guardian wasn't just monitoring performance, it was actively maintaining data integrity across our entire pharmaceutical manufacturing chain. Every batch record, every quality control result, every material transfer had to flow seamlessly between systems that spoke different languages. I opened the log file one last time. Pages of green check marks, timestamp after timestamp of successful validations. But buried at the bottom was a line I'd forgotten about. Primary validation key expired. Automated handoff protocol suspended. I'd coded that years ago as a failsafe. If the primary architect's credentials went dormant for more than 72 hours, the system would stop automatically correcting data inconsistencies between the old and new systems. It wouldn't crash anything, wouldn't delete anything, it would just stop helping. The genius of it was that nobody would notice immediately. The systems would keep running, reports would keep generating, production would continue. But slowly, quietly, the little inconsistencies that Guardian had been smoothing over would start to accumulate. In pharmaceutical manufacturing, those inconsistencies matter a lot. I closed the terminal window and went to bed. For the first time in months, I slept like someone had lifted a weight off my shoulders. Ryan strutted into Monday's stand-up meeting like he'd just closed a billion-dollar deal. He clapped his hands together with fake enthusiasm that made my former colleagues exchange uncomfortable glances. All right, team, fresh week, fresh energy. Howard's departure gives us a perfect opportunity to accelerate our modernization initiative. Jason, Michelle, I'm tasking you two with documenting his legacy architecture. Should be straightforward. Jason Murphy and Michelle Torres were both recent college grads, still eager and optimistic. The kind of hopeful energy that corporate life hadn't beaten out of them yet. They'd been hired as junior developers 6 months ago, right around the time Ryan started his modernization push. They nodded enthusiastically and headed to the conference room with their laptops, notebooks, and enough energy drinks to power a small aircraft. 30 minutes later, Jason poked his head out of the conference room, looking like someone had just asked him to solve quantum mechanics using only a calculator. Where's the actual documentation? Ryan waved dismissively. Check the wiki. Everything should be in Confluence. They checked. What they found were my old project notes from 2015, a few outdated network diagrams, and a folder labeled Legacy Migration, Phase 1, that contained exactly 3 PowerPoint slides from a presentation I'd given to the board 4 years ago. The real system documentation existed, but it was scattered across custom databases, embedded in stored procedure comments, and encoded in naming conventions that made perfect sense to me but looked like ancient hieroglyphs to anyone else. My variable names were practical but unconventional. Functions called things like validate chem batch, reconcile lot tracker, and check compliance flags. The business logic was clear enough if you understood pharmaceutical manufacturing processes, but without that context, they might as well have been written in Sanskrit. There were also the comments. I'd developed a habit over the years of leaving little notes in the code. Things like, this validation catches rounding errors in API calculations. Do not remove. FDA requires this exact sequence. See CFR 21 Part 11.10a. Material transfer logic. If you change this, you break batch tracking */. To me, these were helpful reminders. To Jason and Michelle, they were cryptic warnings from some digital pharaoh protecting his tomb. By noon, Jason looked like someone had just explained quantum physics using finger puppets. Michelle wasn't much better off. None of this makes sense, Jason whispered to Michelle, staring at a database schema that looked like a subway map designed by someone having a nervous breakdown. Michelle pulled up what she thought was a dependency map. Lines and arrows connected boxes and patterns that resembled abstract art more than system architecture. I think this handles batch tracking, but it might also be doing inventory reconciliation or quality control validation. Honestly, I'm not sure it isn't doing all three simultaneously. The database had grown organically over 12 years. What started as a simple inventory tracking system had evolved into a complex web of interconnected processes that handled everything from raw material procurement to finished product shipping. and every piece of it had been built to meet specific FDA requirements that weren't obvious to someone who'd never worked in pharmaceutical manufacturing. Ryan poked his head into the conference room around 2 p.m., still radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from complete ignorance. "How's it going?" Jason rotated his laptop to show a screen full of incomprehensible code relationships that looked like someone had tried to map the human nervous system using post-it notes. "We're making progress. It's just more complex than we expected. The database architecture seems to handle multiple business functions simultaneously, and the validation rules are embedded throughout the stored procedures." Michelle added, "Also, there are about 200 custom functions that don't seem to match any standard ERP patterns. They all have these cryptic names like validate API content and check batch genealogy that make sense individually but create this web of dependencies we can't untangle." Ryan's confidence never wavered. Classic Howard, overcomplicated everything, old school thinking. We'll rewrite it properly using modern frameworks and established design patterns. Clean architecture, microservices, containerized deployments. Shouldn't take more than a few sprints once we get the consulting team on board. What Ryan didn't see, what none of them noticed in their enthusiasm for modernization, was that something subtle had already started happening in the background. Guardian had gone quiet. The little digital watchdog that had been maintaining data integrity across their entire pharmaceutical operation had stopped barking. And in a business where data integrity could mean the difference between FDA approval and a $50 million product recall, silence was about to become very, very expensive. The first crack appeared on Wednesday morning at 9:47 a.m., not with alarms or flashing red lights, but with a phone call from Sarah in accounting that would have been easy to ignore if you didn't understand what it meant. "Hey, we're showing some weird discrepancies in the batch cost calculations," she said, sounding more confused than concerned. "Nothing huge, but the production reports don't match the financial ledger. The variance is about $3,200 on yesterday's runs." Jason and Michelle scrambled to investigate. They found the cost calculation module buried deep in the database architecture, a maze of interconnected stored procedures that pulled data from 6 different systems and cross-referenced it against FDA batch records, material costs, and labor allocations. The code worked, technically. It executed without errors, generated reports on schedule, and produced numbers that looked reasonable at first glance. But the validation routines that normally caught rounding errors, currency conversion mismatches, and data synchronization hiccups had gone silent. Without Guardian's automated checks, small inconsistencies were starting to accumulate. A few cents here from a rounding error, a percentage point there from a delayed material cost update. Nothing that would crash the system, but enough to make the books look sloppy to anyone who bothered to dig into the details. They patched it manually, bypassing the validation entirely and hard-coding the expected values. The error messages stopped, but so did the automated quality controls that had been quietly preventing data corruption for years. "Fixed it," Jason reported to Ryan with the kind of confidence that only comes from not understanding the problem you just created. Just needed to update some legacy validation rules that were too restrictive. Ryan sent an email to the leadership team before lunch. "Minor data sync issue this morning, already resolved by our development team. These legacy system quirks are exactly why we need to accelerate our modernization timeline. Our offshore consulting partners are reviewing the architecture and should have recommendations by end of week." What Ryan didn't mention was that the offshore team had been struggling with their review for 2 weeks. The lead consultant, a sharp guy named Raj Patel from Mumbai, had been honest about their challenges during their last video call. "Mr. Walsh, this system architecture is unlike anything we've seen in pharmaceutical manufacturing. The integration patterns are highly customized, and the business logic appears to be embedded throughout the data layer. We'll need significantly more time to understand the requirements before we can propose a migration strategy." Ryan had cut him off. "Just focus on the technical architecture. We can handle the business requirements on our end." But that was the problem. The business requirements weren't documented anywhere, except in the custom code I'd written over 12 years. Every validation rule, every exception handler, every data transformation had been built to solve specific problems that arose from the unique challenges of pharmaceutical manufacturing. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Denver, scrolling through job listings on my laptop. Senior system architect positions paying $145,000 to $180,000. Fully remote, equity packages, signing bonuses. Companies that understood the value of experience, where 25 years of knowledge was seen as an asset rather than a liability. I had applications ready to submit, resume polished, references lined up, cover letters tailored to each role. All I had to do was click send. But instead, I opened a secure shell connection to a monitoring server I'd set up years ago. Not the company's official dashboard, but my own private window into the system's health. Encrypted, unlisted, invisible to everyone but me. The interface was Spartan. Black background, green text, no fancy graphics. Just raw performance metrics and status indicators. At the bottom, the system heartbeat that used to pulse steady and strong now showed an irregular rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause, 1 beat, long pause. Guardian was dying. Without my authentication credentials, it couldn't maintain the automated data integrity checks that kept everything synchronized. The offshore team was keeping the lights on, but they were flying blind. And in pharmaceutical manufacturing, flying blind eventually leads to crashes. Friday morning brought the first real crisis. An email from Rick Hoffman, our COO, landed in Ryan's inbox at 7:15 a.m. The subject line was deceptively simple. Production variance report, urgent review needed. The message was short and cold. Ryan, we're showing $47,000 in unaccounted material costs from this week's production runs. The batch tracking system says one thing, the financial system says another, and our quality control database has a third set of numbers. Our insurance audit is in 2 weeks. I need answers. Ryan read it twice, then immediately called Jason and Michelle into his office, along with Steve Anderson from the night shift who'd been dealing with increasingly frequent system hiccups. We need a full system health check, Ryan said, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. Something's causing data inconsistencies between production tracking and financial reporting. They spent the entire day tracing data flows, checking APIs, running reconciliation reports. The systems were all running normally. No error messages, no failed processes, no obvious problems. CPU usage was normal, memory allocation was stable, network connectivity was solid, but the numbers didn't add up. It's like the system is running perfectly, but it's not checking its own work, Michelle said finally, exhaustion creeping into her voice after 10 hours of debugging. What do you mean? Ryan asked. All the validation routines are disabled. They're still in the code, but they're not executing. Look at this. She pulled up a database query showing hundreds of stored procedures in a dormant state. Everything was designed to work under Howard's oversight. When his access credentials were revoked, it didn't break the system. It just turned off the safety checks. Jason had been digging through the authentication logs. It gets worse. The system has been running without data validation for 6 days. Every transaction, every batch record, every material transfer, none of it's been cross-checked. Steve, who'd been quietly listening, finally spoke up. That explains the production line issues we've been having. Yesterday, Line 2 manufactured 500 units of the wrong formulation because the recipe database didn't flag that the raw materials didn't match the batch specifications. We caught it during quality control, but if we hadn't... Ryan stared at the screen, finally beginning to understand the scope of what they'd lost. They hadn't just lost an employee. They'd lost the human firewall that had been quietly preventing disasters for over a decade. In pharmaceutical manufacturing, disasters don't just cost money. They cost lives. And the FDA doesn't have a sense of humor about data integrity issues. How do we fix it? Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Jason answered, "We can't, not easily. The entire validation framework is tied to Howard's authentication architecture. We'd have to rebuild it from scratch, and we don't even understand what half of it does," Michelle added. "And we can't rebuild it without understanding the business requirements." Howard didn't just write code. He encoded 25 years of pharmaceutical manufacturing expertise into every validation rule. By Monday, Rick Hoffman wasn't sending emails anymore. He was standing in Ryan's office, holding a printed report that showed $127,000 in financial discrepancies accumulated over just 1 week, along with quality control flags on $300,000 worth of manufactured product that might need to be destroyed. "You told me Howard Pierce was junior staff," Rick said, his voice deadly quiet. But it appears that every critical system in this company was designed around his personal oversight. Why wasn't this dependency flagged during his departure? Ryan tried to deflect. It's just legacy code complexity. We're modernizing the entire stack with our offshore partners. These issues will be resolved once we complete the cloud migration. Rick wasn't buying it. How long? 6 months for full migration. Maybe 8 if we encounter unexpected complexity. We don't have 8 months. Our FDA inspection is in 6 weeks. If they find systemic data integrity issues during their review, we could lose our pharmaceutical manufacturing license. That's $85 million in annual revenue and 400 jobs. The weight of the situation finally hit Ryan. This wasn't about hurt feelings or office politics anymore. This was about the fundamental stability of a company that employed half the people in their small Indiana town. Rick set the report on Ryan's desk and leaned forward. I want Howard Pierce on the phone by end of business today, whatever it takes. Pride is a luxury we can't afford right now. But when they tried to reach me, they found disconnected phone numbers, deactivated email accounts, and a LinkedIn profile that simply said, independent consultant, available for senior architecture roles. I was 1,200 miles away in Colorado, sitting on a porch overlooking the Rocky Mountains, fielding calls from 3 different companies that wanted to make me offers I couldn't refuse. $190,000 base salary, equity packages, full remote work, signing bonuses that were more than my annual salary at Precision Pharmaceuticals. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Rick Hoffman. Howard, this is Rick from Precision Pharmaceuticals. If there's any way we can discuss bringing you back in a consulting capacity, please call me. We may have made an error in how we handled your transition. I listened to the message twice, then deleted it. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as ash. The desperation at Precision Pharmaceuticals escalated quickly after that. Rick tried calling my old references, tracked down my ex-wife, even reached out to Danny Rodriguez to see if he had any way to contact me. But I'd been thorough in my digital disappearance. New phone number, new address, new life. Meanwhile, the system continued its slow-motion collapse. What had started as minor accounting discrepancies grew into a full-scale data integrity crisis. The FDA inspection was now 4 weeks away, and every day brought new problems. Batch records that didn't match quality control results. Material tracking systems that showed impossible inventory levels. Production reports that claimed they'd manufactured products using ingredients that hadn't been delivered yet. The kind of data inconsistencies that make FDA inspectors smile right before they shut you down. Ryan brought in emergency consulting teams from 2 different firms, $500 an hour specialists who spent 3 weeks trying to reverse engineer a system that had evolved organically over 12 years. They produced beautiful PowerPoint presentations full of architectural diagrams and migration timelines, but they couldn't solve the fundamental problem. Nobody understood the business logic embedded in my custom code. The final straw came during a test run of their proposed fixes. The consulting team had rebuilt the batch tracking validation system using modern cloud-based architecture. Clean, elegant, thoroughly documented. It passed all their unit tests and performed flawlessly in their development environment. Then they deployed it to production. Within 6 hours, it had flagged 80% of their active production batches as non-compliant and automatically quarantined $2.3 million worth of manufactured product. The system was working exactly as designed, following industry best practices and standard validation protocols. The problem was that Precision Pharmaceuticals didn't operate according to industry standards. They operated according to the unique requirements of their specific FDA approvals, their particular manufacturing processes, and their customized quality control procedures, all of which had been encoded into my validation rules over the course of 12 years. Steve Anderson called me personally that night, despite strict instructions from management not to contact me. His voice was shaky when I answered. Howard, I know you don't owe us anything, but we're about to lose everything. The FDA inspection is in 2 weeks, and we can't release any products because the new validation system is blocking everything. Ryan's been fired. Rick is talking about shutting down manufacturing entirely rather than risk an FDA violation. I listened without saying much. Steve was a good guy who'd always treated me with respect. He didn't deserve to lose his job because of Ryan's incompetence. The worst part, he continued, is that everyone knows we could have avoided this. If we'd just treated you fairly, if we'd respected what you built instead of trying to replace you with offshore contractors and fancy consultants. After I hung up, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching the sun set behind the mountains. I'd gotten my revenge. Ryan was gone. The company that had dismissed me was facing potential bankruptcy, but 400 people were about to lose their jobs, including good people like Steve and Danny and Linda. The next morning, I called Rick Hoffman. "I'll consult for you," I told him, "but not to fix your system. I'll consult to help you shut it down safely and transfer your manufacturing processes to a partner company that actually understands pharmaceutical operations." The conversation was brief and professional. Rick knew he had no leverage, no room to negotiate. They'd made their choice when they decided my 25 years of experience was less valuable than Ryan's PowerPoint presentations. 6 months later, Precision Pharmaceuticals sold their manufacturing operations to a larger pharmaceutical company for about 40 cents on the dollar. The buyer kept most of the production staff but moved all manufacturing to their existing facilities in North Carolina. Ryan, last I heard, was working for a startup in Austin, probably telling people about his experience leading digital transformation initiatives at a major pharmaceutical company. I'm sure he's learned to use different buzzwords by now. The offshore consulting firm sent me a LinkedIn connection request with a message asking if I'd be interested in helping them understand legacy pharmaceutical system architecture. I declined politely. As for me, I took a position as Chief Technology Officer at a mid-sized pharmaceutical company in Boulder. $240,000 base salary, equity package, full autonomy over IT strategy, and a team that actually listens when I explain why things work the way they do. My new company manufactures generic drugs, and they've been struggling with FDA compliance issues for years, the kind of problems that I'd solved dozens of times at Precision. Within 6 months, we'd streamlined their validation processes, improved their data integrity protocols, and passed our FDA inspection without a single finding. The CEO called it a miracle. I called it experience. During my lunch break today, I got a call from a headhunter. Precision Pharmaceuticals, under new ownership, was looking for a senior system architect. Starting salary $180,000, full benefits, stock options. Would I be interested? I told them I wasn't available. I'm happy where I am, working for people who understand that 25 years of knowledge isn't a liability to be managed, but an asset to be treasured. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic. It's just walking away and building something better somewhere else. Let the corporate world learn its lessons the hard way. There are plenty of companies out there that still value experience over buzzwords, competence over charisma. The mountains here really are beautiful, especially this time of year. And unlike some bridges, the view never gets old. I'm Howard Pierce, and this is what happens when you mistake 25 years of institutional knowledge for legacy thinking. Some systems can't be replaced with modern architecture and offshore consultants. Some expertise can't be downloaded from the cloud. And some people, once dismissed, are perfectly happy to watch the consequences unfold from a safe distance. Coffee in hand, mountains in view, dignity intact. Experience isn't just about knowing how to build systems. It's about understanding why they break, and more importantly, why they shouldn't. In corporate America, they'll replace your position in a week, but it takes decades to replace what you actually knew.